So, as you know, when you're talking about the terrible things that humans do to animals, there are so many different topics to choose from. We can talk about animals in agriculture, or there are hunting and trapping and other wildlife issues, circuses, it's endless. But Troy, who's speaking after me, and I are both going to talk about animals in research today. And here's a strange thing to say. I love to talk about animals in research. Not the substantive, violent part of it, but the ethical part. And the reason I love to talk about it is because the use of animals in research is the topic, I think, that best illustrates the problem with categorizing animals as property or chattels or legal things, as we do in our legal system. Because in this subject area, hurting animals is the very purpose of the activity. And so it shows, contrary to the claims of all of those who hurt animals for profit, how it is perfectly lawful all across this country to cause animals pain, suffering, injury, disability, disease, fear, stress, discomfort, loneliness, hunger, thirst, completely unnatural lives. Research is also interesting because it's the most challenging subject for some people who have ethical concerns about the treatment of animals, right? And I'm sure people in this room have experienced that if you've thought about it yourself or tried talking to others about it. We see animals, the use of animals in research, or many people see it as sort of an unfortunate necessity, right? We don't want to do it, but how can we leave any stone unturned when it comes to seeking to cure the diseases that so deeply affect us and the people that we love? How can we leave any stone unturned? Yet, when scrutinized, this subject area really raises what I think are the most difficult problems in respect of justifying the instrumental use of animals. So, in my few minutes this afternoon, I'm going to try and touch on two things. I'm going to say just a few words about what I think are the ethical problems inherent in using animals in research. In general, and then I'm going to touch on Animal Alliance's campaign to stop the use of former pets in research in particular. So the inherent ethical problems, I'm just afraid I'm going to drop this, sorry. Animals are used, as many of you will know, in a wide range of experiments conducted in or by both public and private institutions across this country, universities, hospitals, governments, pharmaceutical, and other corporations. And although humans would be, of course, the best models for studies related to human disease and matters generally affecting the human body, ethical concerns preclude the use of unconsenting humans in experiments. And when it comes to the use of consenting humans in experiments, really that's prohibited for the kinds of things that are done to animals. And where it is permitted, it's subject to controls and extensive, deep, persistent ethical debate. In fact, law professor Von Black has written a really great piece about all the criminal offenses that you would be charged with if you did to humans what we do to animals in research. So it's really therefore incorrect to say that we will leave no stone unturned when we are on this quest to cure human disease, right? Because however important such cures are, we've decided as a society that some things are even more important, right? An individual's right, the right that each and every one of us in this room has to our own life, liberty, and bodily integrity is seen as more important and takes priority over the knowledge that might be gained if any of us in this room were used instrumentally for the benefit of others. And when we turn to animals to be the surrogate models for the human body, we create a very interesting logical contradiction. So, research is done on animals on the basis that they are like us, right? And that means the results of the experiments that we do on them are going to be meaningful to us, to the human body. So animals must be like us. But on the other hand, it's justified on the basis that they're not like us. And therefore, there's no ethical concern, right? How convenient. They're like us, they're not like us. They're like us, they're not like us. And that contradiction is an inherent premise of the practice. The researchers can't get around that. And it's also the basis, of course, of much of the objection to it. However, that contradiction is really, as you will have seen, obscured in the public realm, right? For lots of reasons. We see the research industry very sophisticated in this way, emphasizing the very serious problems that it promises to solve. And so it perpetuates this idea that vivisection, the use of live animals in research, is this unfortunate necessity. At the same time, it assures the public of the humane care that it's providing to the animals, how much it loves the animals that it uses, and then it portrays its critics, all of you in this room, as emotional and soft and little bunny huggers, or militant and terrorist extremists, or both, I don't know. Somehow we can be all of these things. And in these ways, it's been really successful at deflecting widespread public scrutiny. So I invite you to just take a wee moment to think about these claims. So first, the categorization of the use of animals in experiments as an unfortunate necessity. That is not just a factual assertion, is it? That's a moral assertion. And the practice is often framed this way, right? It's like a choice between killing an animal or letting a person die, right? They make you feel silly. How could you care about being mean to mice when we're talking about curing childhood leukemia? But this, of course, is an incredibly simplistic reduction of the scientific process itself. But it's also misleading from an ethical perspective, because the choice so posed has already been made. Right? What I mean by that is the act of considering whether taking one life will save another reduces the status of the first to a mere instrument. Right? We would never speak of the necessity of using a human being in an experiment without their consent, or taking a human being's organs to be transplanted into another person without their consent, or when we hear of such things happening in other parts of the world, we speak of it with condemnation. So characterizing the practice as an unfortunate necessity really presupposes and accepts that animals have a categorically different moral status than humans. Second, this humane promise that the industry makes. If a procedure is too terrible to subject a human to, how does it become humane when you subject an animal to it? How does that magic transformation happen? Only if in law, and as far as, only if that vague word has no actual meaning. And in law, as far as I know, it actually has no meaning. We throw around the word humane, but I can't find it in any legislation with respect to animals. So without having to explain what they mean, the industry throws this term around, as you know, just as a squishy way of allaying any concern that the lay public might have. It's all humane, it's all humane. When you talk to people who are wearing, like Jenny suggested, talking to people wearing fur when you encounter them in public, they've all been assured by Canada Goose that it's all humane. What does humane mean? What's the law requiring it to be humane? Oh, we never asked that second question, and they never have to answer it. And so when the industry just makes these vague assurances that everything's pretty and humane, most people who are busy with 1,000 problems in their lives don't have time and feel they don't actually have to think about what is going on behind those very tightly closed doors. But even if we did want to think about it, information about what exactly is being done to animals and for what reason is very carefully withheld from you and from all of us in this room. There is no legal duty on researchers or any agency to make that information publicly available. And when it's sought by freedom of information requests, disclosure is opposed by the research institutions. It's opposed by the CCAC, the Canadian Council on Animal Care, which is the national voluntary organization that's responsible for setting and maintaining and overseeing the implementation of standards for animal ethics and care in research across the country. We have no federal laws governing it. And then when any disclosure is actually made, it's very heavily redacted, right? Covered with black lines so that you can't read what's there. So with scientists seen as what Charlotte Montgomery called the miracle workers of the secular age, deference is completely given to the industry to determine what is necessary and humane and to decide completely for itself what is acceptable practice. Now, Ontario is the only province in Canada that has legislation specifically dedicated to animals in research, and it's called the Animals for Research Act. But that legislation gives hardly any consideration to the interests of the animals themselves. And this is particularly troubling when we consider that this is a competitive multi-billion-dollar industry, or industries. Even the research subjects themselves are bred and sold by large corporations with their own very profitable patent-protected strains of animals who are selectively bred to be susceptible to certain types of cancers or seizures or having Alzheimer's, as we're hearing in the news recently. And they call these animals purpose-bred. When it comes to cats and dogs, many who are used in Canadian, or at least we know for sure in Ontario labs, are former pets. As the Julie, I believe it was a person back asked about earlier. The purpose-bred animals surely do not deserve to be used in research, but there's something about using lost or stolen or even unwanted pets in this way that seems a particular violation of trust. Now, of course, the industry doesn't call these animals pets, but more clinically, random source. These are random source animals. And rather than protect these animals, the Animals for Research Act creates the only system in the country of pound seizure, which effectively requires municipalities or municipal pounds to turn their unclaimed animals over to an interested research facility if they are not claimed within 72 hours. So this brings me to Animal Alliance's campaign to stop the use of former pets in research. Now, they had a campaign to end the use of animals in research in general and pets in particular for many years, and it was very successful in reducing the number of animals being used. However, those numbers are rising again, and Animal Alliance is ramping up the campaign again. They've begun by undertaking a major research project to get a clear picture of the problem. And so what I'm talking to you about here is information that I've gotten from a presentation done by Liz, and that's been written about, at least I think in a draft report that I stole from in this presentation by Erica, who may recognize it as familiar, so I quote her now. If you think it sounds good, thank her. So what they've looked at is data published by the CCAC. There's lots to say, by the way, about the information given to us by the CCAC. That's a long digression. I'm going to resist the temptation, but if you're interested in the question period. They also looked at research facility animal use and instruction documents, inspection reports of research facilities in pounds produced by OMAFRA, which is the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, who oversees the Animals for Research Act. And they've looked at municipal pet, dog, and cat bylaws in 107 so far of the 440 municipalities in Ontario. So, all research facilities in Ontario have to be registered with OMAFRA, and they are subject to inspection pursuant to the Animals for Research Act. But when I last looked into it, when I was writing my book, I actually spoke to the chief inspector, who was the chief inspector of himself, because it turns out there are 120 locations, at least, he thought at the time, where animals were being used in research in Ontario, because some facilities have several sites around the province. So at least 120 locations and one inspector. Do the math. I wonder if Doug Ford is going to hire more. So research facilities can also be assessed by the CCAC to see if they're implementing CCAC guidelines. And any facility that's getting public research dollars has to be certified by CCAC to get that funding. But facilities that are receiving private money and private pharmaceutical corporations do not. So that means there's a lot we don't know. We don't know how many facilities are registered with the CCAC, how many aren't. We don't know whether private facilities outside Ontario acquire cats and dogs as former pets for research. The animals used in those facilities would not be included in the CCAC data. But what do we know? Well, we know that in the terrible 80s, between 1980 and 1989, both purpose-bred and random source dogs and cats were used in registered research facilities across Ontario. And in fact, in those days, the majority was random sourced. And on average, 3,977 pets were used in research every year in the 80s. But as you heard, the Toronto Humane Society was a strong, active organization in those early 80s, and then along came Animal Alliance, and during their campaigns, there was a major decline in the use of all dogs and cats for research in Ontario. And the average number of pets in research between, now jumping ahead to the new millennium, 2003 and 2011, from almost 4,000, had gone down now to 642. Terrible for those 642, but what a dramatic decline. But the numbers began to increase again in 2013. And since that time, the average number of pets, just pets, by the way, a tiny fraction of the whole, pets in research every year is now over 4,700. So we've gone beyond even the terrible 80s. So what happened to drive these numbers up? Animal Alliance has a theory which has to do with the change in a definition of the term donated by owner in the instruction form that research facilities have to fill out. I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to talk some more about that in the question period, we can do that. But what's clear is that both the animal use reports from research institutions and OMAFRA's research facility inspection reports show dogs and cats going to research from pounds, as we know because the law requires it, but also from shelters, from humane societies, from rescue groups, and the public is not allowed to know which ones. So what else has Animal Alliance learned through the Freedom of Information process? Well, secrecy persists. So much is withheld. The names of institutions, the species of animals, the description of what is actually done to them in the course of the experiment. But between 2012 and 2017, they found 26 inspection reports where dogs and cats were used, and in 16 of those, more than half, for people who don't want to do math on a snowy Sunday afternoon, more than half of these were in non-compliance with the Animals for Research Act. OMAFRA provided a list of 67 Ontario registered research facilities in 2016. 30% of the names were withheld. Of the 67 facilities, approximately 20 were using dogs and cats in research, and of those, approximately 11 were using pets. And even heavily redacted, those reports show problems in how the animals are housed and handled. They cite numerous violations of standard operating procedures. Almost all of them show deficiencies in sanitation, inadequacy of design of housing, low standard of living conditions, lack of safety. Some are using expired drugs, including anesthetics and pain relievers. Some document injury to animals through faulty equipment and rundown facilities. Many instances of human failure to protect dogs and cats in their care from other animals who may be vicious or dangerously ill or terrified. Failure to provide adequate veterinary care or proper oversight. Various reports cite dogs housed in small rusty cages where the lights are never turned off. You hear constant barking, but you can't see the other animals. I was actually in a facility like that, where the humans don't come on the weekend. They're not fed, they're not given anesthetic, their cages aren't clean. I don't work on Sundays. And there are specific examples. One where, I won't go over all of them, the inspector writes, intervention action to be taken for dogs that were experiencing severe pain was not included. Types and dosages of analgesics, not even mentioned. One lab had no standard operating procedure to ensure consistent regular involvement of veterinary staff. Another lacked requirements for regular veterinary care, sloppy practices in terms of open feed. One report noted serious consideration should be given to providing experience in current anesthetic strategies for students, despite this being a terminal procedure. Read between the lines. One report noted, I was informed there was an outbreak of feline panleukopenia in the cat room. There was no opportunity to isolate the infected cats as there wasn't a quarantine room in the facility and some had to be euthanized. There's much more. And I'll steal Erica's, or I hope I'm not stealing Erica's thunder by sharing with you an observation that I read in her report. If we know all of this from such heavily redacted reports, what are those thick black lines covering? So, to finish, thanks to the Animal Alliance's work and other advocacy organizations who've been supporting them over decades, Many municipalities in Ontario, as you heard Liz say earlier, including Toronto, London, other urban centres, have opted not to turn their animals over to research, keeping unclaimed pets for as long as necessary to return them home or to try and adopt them out. Some call Animal Alliance's Project Jessie to come out. They have even a relationship. Hey, we come and get a couple of guys, and Animal Alliance will send somebody out, the Project Jessie, to rescue those animals and try and find homes for them. But others, and they're often smaller centers, rural centers, they lack funds, they lack public support, they lack paid personnel to provide shelter or care for stray animals. They lack the nerve, maybe, to defy provincial law. And then the contracts for animal collection will often go to private operators, and the ones who are in it for the money are very happy to get the few bucks they get for selling animals to research. In some cases, as Liz already mentioned, there are no municipal bylaws in place, so they're hearing stories of people sometimes posing as Humane Society officials, driving around, picking up strays, stealing them from doorsteps. This is a very common practice. That's what motivated the passage of the Animals for Research Act back in the 70s in the first place, not concern about what was happening to animals in labs, concern about pets that were being stolen and used in research. So the goal now, again, that Animal Alliance is striking back up is to amend the law to stop the sale of pets to research. And I want to thank all of you who are in this room for supporting them in that work. So thank you.